May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be always acceptable to you, O Lord. Amen. So today's Gospel reading is one that a lot of people, even those who aren't Christian, will be aware of. Jesus feeds the 5,000 with loaves and fishes. It's your classic miracle. There's actually a scene in the American Office where a couple arrange a small table of party food for their guests at their daughter's christening. Unfortunately, at the end of the service, the vicar tells the whole church congregation that they are invited to the party. As the guests stare anxiously at the empty plates, the father jokes, "We're going to need a loaves and fishes kind of a miracle today." And his uptight co-worker replies, "Jesus is not your caterer." It's a funny scene, and it reminds me that this is one of those stories that a lot of people know. You may notice that the loaves and fishes feature on my green stone. And it's an image that's adapted, I brought it so you can see, from the mosaic at the Church of the Multiplication in Tagbra on the Sea of Galilee. And I was lucky enough to go there when I was a child, and I've spoken before about my wonder at being in the place where Jesus is said to have performed this miracle. The mosaics date back to about the year 480 AD, but there's been a church on that site going back even further. On our trip, my mum bought a t-shirt with this image on, and she wore it a lot when I was a child, and so, you know, when I think back to the 90s, I just think of this image, really. When I was trying to think of an image that would remind me of my growing faith, it had to be this one. The Bible stories that we have grown up with or that have entered popular culture can sometimes be a little difficult to see with fresh eyes. We think we know the story and what the message of it is. Miracles speak to us of God's power, but they tell us so much more about the kingdom of God. As you may remember me saying a few weeks ago, the Bible changes everything. But to really hear what God is saying through it requires us to ask questions and to really think about what the mighty acts of God that have been handed down to us say to us today. Given that Jesus is not our caterer, why did he feed the people? There will be endless answers to this question, and if you have any that you would like to tell me about, I would love to hear them. One answer is that Jesus is demonstrating the generosity of God. The crowd appear to have come empty-handed to Jesus, but they go away satisfied. They have come to seek out Jesus, and he will not send anyone away lacking. It isn't always easy for us to identify God's generosity to us, especially when our culture places so much emphasis on earning and deserving the things that come our way. This miracle shows that with God, that we have a God of abundance who wants to share the good things that we've been given. You may see that the text itself gives an explanation for why Jesus did what he did. Compassion. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. Right at the beginning of the reading, it tells us that Jesus has just heard about the execution of John the Baptist and has withdrawn himself in order to grieve. Instead of having time to come to terms with the loss of such an important person in his life, the crowd seeks him out for his healing and his teaching. Now, Jesus does the opposite of what I'd advise anyone else to do in that situation, and he engages with the gathered crowds and heals them. Even then, he doesn't send them away, but he feeds them. Jesus shows us compassion that seems beyond human capabilities. By feeding a crowd when he is tired and heartbroken, shows us that God's compassion never comes to an end. There will be times when our friends have too much on to help us with our problems. There will be times when our families just don't seem to understand what we're going through. Dare I say it, there will even be times when the vicar is off sick or on holiday and won't be there to pick up the phone. But God is always there. As the name of the church suggests, this is a miracle of multiplication. A small amount of food becoming a great feast with baskets of leftovers. This is the same sort of theme as the mustard seed parable that we heard Reverend Helen talking about last week. God takes even the tiniest offerings and grows them. Whether it is our faith, or our gifts, or our mission activities, God never requires us to meet halfway, only to take the smallest step. As the disciples find, it takes trust in Jesus to make these amazing multiplications happen, and to listen to God's agenda and not our own. Remember, the disciples, out of care for the crowds and also for Jesus, wanted to send everyone away. But in bringing what they could to Jesus, something immeasurably greater happened. Now, the final thing I want to explore about this story requires a bit of borrowing from John's Gospel. This story is so significant that it is recorded in all 4 Gospels. Let's face it, we don't even have that about Christmas. John's Gospel adds a really interesting detail. John reveals that the disciples get the loaves and fishes from a young boy. What I find most striking about this is that the people that are gathered are described in our reading as those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. The child who provided the loaves and fish was not even counted among the 5,000. Imagine if our service registers for today said 5 men and women and children besides. Just think of all the people gathered here who would be missed from that. All of us can sometimes feel overlooked. I know that many over 70s at the moment are feeling frustrated at the way they have been treated as a different category of person. Though the impulse to do this has been one of protection, I think in practice many people have felt the opposite, devalued and pushed aside. We continue to hear about the oppression of BAME people and how prejudice has been glossed over. And also this week I have been horrified yet again by the tiny conviction rates for rape and serious sexual violence. They paint a picture of a society where victims and survivors have no realistic possibility of justice. Their experiences and their pain have not been taken seriously. People of all kinds are made to feel that they don't count. There are certainly times when I have felt this was true of myself, and I suspect I'm not alone in that either. Yet in this story, Jesus takes the offering of someone who wasn't counted and used it to bring those people closer to God. As shown in this miracle, help people see that they needed to follow Jesus. Never underestimate what God does through people who don't seem to count. We see it in this miracle, and I've seen it time and time again in my ministry. No matter who we are, or how others make us feel, we always count to God. God sees our tiny bit of faith, our small amount of time, or our morsel of bread, and does wonderful things. But we need to have enough faith in ourselves to believe that God can use us. Jesus is not our caterer. Jesus is our nurturer, our bread, our shepherd, our friend, and of course our Redeemer. Jesus did not stop with the 5,000 men who were counted. So let us always remember God's care for those who are overlooked and the amazing things that God can do through them. Amen.